Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at the gates of Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder and her orders clutched in her other hand. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and the salt air from the Pacific Ocean filled her lungs. She was 32 years old, 5'6", and had spent the last decade proving herself in every corner of the military that would let her through the door. Today was different. Today, she was reporting to work with the most elite warriors in the world, the Navy SEALs, as their new K-9 handler and animal behavior specialist. It was a role that had only recently opened to women, and Sarah knew that every eye would be on her, waiting for her to fail. The guard at the gate checked her identification twice, his eyes flicking from her face to the card and back again. "K-9 unit is around back, ma'am," he said finally, his tone neither friendly nor hostile, just factual. "Thank you," Sarah replied, adjusting her grip on the bag. She made her way across the base, her boots clicking against the pavement with each step. Around her, men in various stages of training ran, shouted, and pushed themselves to their absolute limits. No one paid her much attention at first. She was just another officer walking across the compound. But as she got closer to the K-9 facility, she could feel the change in the air. A group of 5 men stood outside the long, low building that housed the military working dogs. They were all tall, all muscular, all carrying themselves with the particular confidence that came from knowing you were among the best of the best. Their conversation died as she approached. "Can we help you, ma'am?" one of them asked. He was the tallest of the group, with close-cropped blonde hair and eyes the color of ice. His name tape read Morrison. "I'm Lieutenant Chen," Sarah said, keeping her voice level and professional. "Reporting for duty as the new K-9 handler." The silence that followed was heavy. Then, one of the other men, shorter but broader, let out a low whistle. "You've got to be kidding me." "Is there a problem?" Sarah asked, meeting his gaze directly. Morrison held up a hand. "No problem, Lieutenant. We were just expecting someone else." "You were expecting a man," Sarah said flatly. "We were expecting someone with experience handling combat dogs in active war zones," Morrison corrected, though the tight smile on his face suggested that Sarah's first assessment had been accurate too. "I have 3 tour in Afghanistan," Sarah replied calmly. "I worked with explosive detection dogs and patrol dogs. I have certifications in canine behavior, trauma response, and tactical deployment. My record is in my file." "We've seen your file," another man said. His name tape read Kowalski, and his expression was skeptical. "Looks real good on paper." Sarah had been through this before. In every unit, every assignment, there were men who saw her gender before they saw her rank or her record. She had learned long ago that arguing was pointless. The only thing that mattered was the work. "Where's the kennel master?" she asked. "That would be Chief Dawson," Morrison said. "He's inside. But before you go in there, Lieutenant, there's something you should know." Sarah waited. "We've got a situation with one of the dogs," Morrison continued. "Rex, he's a Belgian Malinois, one of the best detection and attack dogs we've ever had. But he came back from his last deployment different. Aggressive, won't let anyone near him, won't eat properly. We've had 3 handlers try to work with him, and all 3 ended up needing medical attention." "What happened to him over there?" Sarah asked. Morrison's expression darkened. "His handler was killed, IED. Rex was right there when it happened. He's been off ever since. The docs say it's trauma, PTSD if a dog can get that." "They can," Sarah said quietly. "What's the plan for him?" Kowalski spoke up. "Chief says if we can't get him under control in the next 2 weeks, he'll have to be put down. Can't have a dog on base, that's a danger to personnel." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She had seen this before, too. Good dogs, loyal dogs, who came back broken from war and were discarded because no one wanted to put in the work to heal them. It was the same way the military sometimes treated its human soldiers. "I'd like to see him," she said. The men exchanged glances. Morrison shrugged. "Your funeral, Lieutenant, come on." They led her into the building. The interior was clean and well-maintained, with concrete floors and rows of large kennels on either side. Most of the kennels held dogs, German shepherds and Belgian Malinois mostly, all alert and watchful. At the far end of the building, separated from the others, was a single kennel with a sign that read, "Danger, do not approach." Inside that kennel was Rex. He was a beautiful animal, Sarah thought. His coat was the rich brown and black typical of his breed, his ears erect and alert. But his eyes were what caught her attention. They were dark and haunted, filled with a wariness that went beyond normal canine caution. This was a dog who had learned that the world was a dangerous place and who trusted nothing and no one. As the group approached, Rex rose to his feet. A low growl rumbled from his chest. "Easy, boy," Morrison said, but he stopped a good 6 feet from the kennel. Sarah studied the dog carefully. His body language was defensive, not offensive. His weight was shifted back, not forward. His ears were up, listening. He was scared, she realized. Scared and alone and trying desperately to protect himself from a world that had already hurt him once. "Has anyone tried food-based desensitization?" she asked. "He won't eat when people are around," Kowalski said. "We leave food in there, he eats it eventually, but try to hand-feed him? No way." What about his previous handler's personal effects? Something with a familiar scent. Morrison shook his head. All of Sergeant Williams' gear was destroyed in the blast. There's nothing left. Sarah stepped closer to the kennel. Rex's growl grew louder, more insistent. "I wouldn't do that, ma'am," one of the other SEALs warned. But Sarah had already crouched down, making herself smaller, less threatening. She didn't look directly at Rex. Instead, she angled her body to the side and let her gaze drift past him, showing him in dog language that she wasn't a threat. "Hey, Rex," she said softly. "I know you're hurting. I know the world doesn't make sense anymore. I know you lost someone you loved." The growling continued, but something in the dog's posture shifted slightly. "I'm not here to hurt you," Sarah continued, her voice low and soothing. "I'm not here to force you to do anything. I just want you to know that you're not alone." She stayed there, crouched and still, for a long moment. Then she stood slowly and backed away. "He needs time," she said to the men, "and patience, and someone who won't give up on him." Morrison crossed his arms. "You think you're that someone?" "I think he deserves a chance," Sarah replied. "Don't you?" Before Morrison could answer, a door at the far end of the building opened, and a man in his 50s with graying hair and a weathered face walked in. His name tape identified him as Dawson. "You must be Lieutenant Chen," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to the unit." Sarah shook his hand. "Thank you, Chief." "I see you've met our problem child," Dawson said, nodding toward Rex's kennel. "I've met him," Sarah agreed. "Morrison here, fill you in on the situation." He did. Dawson studied her for a moment. "What do you think?" "I think he's traumatized and scared, and he needs specialized care," Sarah said. "I'd like to work with him." "You understand the risk. This dog has put 3 men in the infirmary." "I understand." Dawson glanced at Morrison, then back at Sarah. "All right, Lieutenant, he's yours. You've got 2 weeks. But I'm warning you now, if you can't make progress with him in that time, I'll have no choice but to follow protocol." "Understood," Sarah said. "There's one more thing," Morrison said, and there was something in his tone that made Sarah's instincts prickle. "Chief, tell her about the test." Dawson's expression tightened. "That's not necessary, Morrison." "With all due respect, Chief, it is," Morrison insisted. "Every handler who's worked with these dogs has gone through it. If Lieutenant Chen is going to be part of this unit, she should too." Sarah looked between them. "What test?" Dawson sighed. "It's a tradition, nothing official. When a new handler comes in, we see how they do with a dog they've never met before in a high-stress situation." "And what exactly does that involve?" Sarah asked carefully. Morrison smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. "Simple, Lieutenant. We put you in a training yard with a dog that hasn't been fed in 24 hours. You get 1 minute alone with the animal. If you can get it to obey a basic command, you pass. If not," he shrugged, "well, then maybe this isn't the right assignment for you." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. This wasn't about her competence. This was about them trying to scare her off, to make her quit before she even started. It was hazing, pure and simple, and it was also probably against regulations. But if she refused, they would use it as evidence that she couldn't handle the job. When? She asked. Morrison's smile widened. No time like the present, unless you need time to prepare. I'm ready now, Sarah said, meeting his gaze steadily. Lieutenant, you don't have to do this, Dawson said quietly. I can order them to stand down. No, Sarah said. If this is what it takes to be accepted here, then let's do it. Morrison nodded, clearly pleased. Follow me. They walked outside to a large, fenced training yard. The other SEALs followed, word apparently having spread, because several more men had joined the group. Sarah noticed that none of them looked particularly sympathetic. They wanted to see the new girl fail. The dog we'll be using is Kaiser, Morrison explained. He's a German shepherd, 3 years old, trained in protection work. He hasn't eaten since yesterday morning, and right now, he's in that shed over there, getting more agitated by the minute. Sarah looked at the shed. She could hear scratching and whining from inside. The rules are simple, Morrison continued. We open the shed, the dog comes out. You have 1 minute to get him under control and sitting on command. No treats, no toys, no equipment, just you and the dog. You get bit, we intervene. Otherwise, the clock runs out or you complete the task. Understood. Understood, Sarah said. She stripped off her jacket, leaving her in just her uniform shirt. Then she took a deep breath and centered herself. She had worked with hundreds of dogs in her career. She understood their language, their instincts, their fears and drives. A hungry dog was motivated by food, yes, but every dog was also a pack animal at heart. Every dog wanted leadership, structure, security. I'm ready, she said. Morrison pulled out his phone to use as a timer. On my mark, 3, 2, 1. Another SEAL opened the shed door. Kaiser exploded from the shed like a missile, all muscle and fury and hunger. He was a magnificent animal. Sarah noted in the split second she had to observe him. His coat was thick and glossy, black and tan, his ears alert, his eyes locked onto her with the intense focus of a predator who had just spotted prey. The men around the fence had gone quiet, watching. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to panic, to run, to scream. That's what they expected. That's what they wanted. She didn't move. Instead, Sarah did something that went against every human instinct when confronted by an aggressive, hungry dog. She turned her body to the side, breaking direct eye contact, and she relaxed her shoulders. Then, in a calm, low voice, she said, Kaiser, easy. The dog was charging straight at her, closing the distance in seconds. 80 pounds of trained attack dog, driven by 24 hours of hunger and the instinct to defend and dominate. Sarah waited. At the last possible moment, just as Kaiser was about to reach her, she dropped into a crouch and turned her back to him completely. It was a position of absolute vulnerability, and it sent a message that no amount of words could convey. I am not a threat. I am not prey. I am not your enemy. Kaiser skidded to a halt so close that Sarah could feel his hot breath on the back of her neck. She could hear him panting, could sense his confusion. Every handler he had worked with approached him with confidence and dominance, showing him through their body language that they were in charge. But this person, this stranger who smelled different from the usual handlers, was showing submission without weakness. It didn't fit his training or his expectations. Sarah stayed absolutely still. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure the dog could hear it, but her breathing remained slow and even. Good boy, Kaiser, she said softly. Good boy, you're confused, aren't you? You thought this was an attack drill, but it's not. There's no threat here, just you and me. She could hear Kaiser moving behind her, circling, sniffing. The dog's training told him to treat this as a threat assessment, but his instincts were telling him something different. This person wasn't acting like a target, wasn't acting like an enemy. The mixed signals were creating hesitation, and hesitation was exactly what Sarah needed. Slowly, very slowly, she extended one hand backward, palm up, fingers relaxed. Not reaching for the dog, just offering. An invitation, not a demand. Kaiser sniffed her hand thoroughly. Sarah could feel his wet nose against her palm, could feel the slight brush of his whiskers. She remained motionless. "That's right," she murmured. "I'm safe. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to take anything from you." Around the fence, the seals were no longer making jokes or smiling. They were watching in silence, and Sarah could feel their surprise even without seeing their faces. Kaiser completed his circle and came back to stand in front of her, though still at a wary distance. Sarah risked a glance at him from the corner of her eye. His ears were forward, his tail was level, and his mouth was slightly open in a panting expression. Not aggressive, curious. "Kaiser," she said, her voice still low and calm. "Sit." The dog's ears twitched. He knew that command, had followed it thousands of times. But this wasn't his handler giving it. This was a stranger, and stranger meant unpredictable, and unpredictable meant potential danger. Sarah waited. Patience was everything with animals. Humans wanted immediate results, instant compliance, but animals lived in a different time frame. They needed to process, to assess, to decide. "Sit," she repeated, and this time she included a small hand gesture, a gentle downward motion. Kaiser shifted his weight. Sarah could see him thinking, weighing his options. And then, slowly, the dog lowered his hindquarters to the ground. He sat. The yard exploded with noise. The seals were shouting, some in disbelief, some in what sounded almost like anger. But Sarah ignored them all. She remained focused on Kaiser, and slowly, carefully, she raised herself from her crouch to a kneeling position. "Good boy," she said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "Such a good boy, Kaiser." She saw Morrison checking his phone at the fence line. "Time," he called out, and his voice was tight. Sarah stood fully and turned to face the men. Kaiser remained sitting, watching her with an expression that might have been respect. "She got lucky," Kowalski said immediately. "The dog was just confused." "Confused?" Sarah asked, walking toward the fence. "Is that what you call proper reading of canine body language and appropriate de-escalation techniques? Because I call it doing my job." Morrison's jaw was clenched. "One test doesn't prove anything, Lieutenant." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "It doesn't, but it does prove that I know what I'm doing and that I won't run or panic when faced with a challenge. Isn't that what you wanted to see?" Dawson, who had been watching from the side, stepped forward. "I think the lieutenant has more than proven herself. This test is concluded." "Actually," Sarah said, and there was steel in her voice now, "I'd like to address something. Chief Dawson, is there an official regulation requiring new K-9 handlers to undergo this particular test?" Dawson's expression was carefully neutral. "No, Lieutenant. As I mentioned, it's a tradition, not an official requirement. A tradition that involves deliberately starving an animal and then using it to intimidate a new team member," Sarah said, looking directly at Morrison. "A tradition that could be classified as hazing under military code of conduct. A tradition that, if I'm not mistaken, was not extended to the last 3 male handlers who joined this unit." The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet. This was the silence of men who knew they had been caught. Morrison's face flushed red. "You're accusing us of hazing." "I'm stating facts," Sarah replied calmly. "You subjected me to a test that is not part of official protocols, that involves animal mistreatment, and that was designed specifically to humiliate or intimidate me. If that's not hazing, I'd like to know what you call it." "We were testing your competence," Kowalski argued. "No," Sarah said. "If you wanted to test my competence, you could have reviewed my file, watched me work with the dogs under normal conditions, or evaluated my performance over my first week here. Instead, you chose to create a dangerous situation that could have resulted in injury to me or to Kaiser. That's not testing. That's bullying." Dawson cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Chen makes valid points. Morrison, I think you and I need to have a conversation about proper integration procedures for new personnel." Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment, he just nodded stiffly. "In the meantime," Dawson continued. "Lieutenant Chen, why don't you get settled in your quarters? Report back here at 0600 tomorrow, and we'll begin your official orientation." "Yes, Chief," Sarah said. She glanced back at Kaiser, who was still sitting patiently in the yard. "Someone should feed that dog." "I'll take care of it," Dawson said. Sarah retrieved her jacket and her duffel bag, very aware of the eyes following her as she walked away from the K-9 facility. She had won this round, but she knew it had come at a cost. Men like Morrison didn't forget being called out, especially not in front of their peers. She had made an enemy today, possibly several. But she had also made a point, and more importantly, she had shown herself and everyone else that she belonged here. The quarters assigned to her were in a building near the edge of the base, a small single room with a bed, a desk, and a locker. It was Spartan but clean, and it was hers. Sarah unpacked her belongings methodically, hanging her uniforms, arranging her books, setting up her laptop. When everything was in its place, she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself, finally, to shake. The confrontation with Kaiser had been more frightening than she had let on. If she had misjudged the dog's temperament, if he had been truly aggressive rather than just hungry and confused, she could have been seriously injured. And the confrontation with Morrison and his team had been risky in a different way. She had essentially accused them of conduct violations on her first day. That could backfire spectacularly. But Sarah had learned long ago that the only way to survive in environments that didn't want you was to establish boundaries early and enforce them ruthlessly. If she had let the test slide, if she had laughed it off or accepted it as just part of the culture, it would have set a precedent. They would have continued to test her, to push her, to try to make her quit. This way, at least, they knew she wouldn't be pushed around. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Impressive work today with Kaiser. Looking forward to seeing what you can do with Rex. Dawson." Sarah smiled slightly. At least she had one ally on base. That night, she lay in her narrow bed and thought about Rex, alone in his kennel, haunted by memories of explosions and death. She thought about Kaiser, used as a weapon to intimidate her. She thought about all the military working dogs she had known over the years, loyal and brave and often treated as equipment rather than as the living, feeling beings they were. Tomorrow, she would begin the real work. Tomorrow, she would start trying to heal a dog that everyone else had given up on. And maybe, just maybe, she would prove that second chances were worth fighting for. She fell asleep thinking about dark, haunted eyes, and the sound of a low, warning growl. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the K-9 facility at 5:45, 15 minutes before her scheduled report time. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky pink and orange over the Pacific. The base was already alive with activity, men running in formation, vehicles moving between buildings, the constant hum of military life. Dawson was already there, standing outside Rex's kennel with a clipboard and a thoughtful expression. "You're early, Lieutenant," he observed. "I wanted to observe Rex before the day got busy," Sarah said. "See how he behaves when the environment is calm." Dawson nodded approvingly. "Smart, come on then." They approached the kennel together. Rex was lying down in the back corner, his head on his paws, but his eyes were open and alert. As soon as he saw them approaching, he scrambled to his feet, that same low growl starting in his chest. "How was he overnight?" Sarah asked. Handler on duty said he paced most of the evening, finally settled down around 0200. Ate his food, drank some water. No incidents. Sarah studied the dog carefully. In the soft morning light, she could see details she had missed yesterday. Rex was thinner than he should be, his ribs visible beneath his coat. There was an old scar on his right shoulder, probably from the explosion that had killed his handler. And his eyes, those dark, wary eyes, were the eyes of a soldier who had seen too much. "What was his handler like?" Sarah asked. "Sergeant Williams." Dawson's expression softened. "Good man, one of the best. He and Rex were a perfect team. Williams had a gift with animals, same as you seem to. They'd been together for 3 years, deployed twice. Rex would have done anything for him. And now Williams is gone, and Rex doesn't understand why," Sarah said quietly. "That's about the size of it," Dawson agreed. Dogs like Rex, they bond deep. Losing his handler wasn't just losing a person. It was losing his entire world. Sarah nodded slowly. I'd like to start working with him today. What's your approach? Slow, Sarah said. No pressure, no demands. I just want to spend time near him, let him get used to my presence. Build trust before we try anything else. You've got 2 weeks, Lieutenant, Dawson reminded her. I know, Sarah said, but rushing won't help. It'll just make him more defensive. Dawson considered this, then nodded. All right, you've got clearance to access this kennel whenever you need to, but be smart about it. Don't take unnecessary risks. I won't, Sarah promised. The rest of that first day was spent in orientation. Dawson walked her through the facility, introduced her to the other dogs, explained the training protocols and deployment schedules. There were 12 dogs total in the unit, each with their own specialties and personalities. Most of them were friendly enough with Sarah, though reserved. They knew she was new, an unknown quantity. The other handlers were less welcoming than the dogs. Word had apparently spread about the incident with Kaiser, and Sarah could feel the resentment in the air. Morrison and his team kept their distance, speaking to her only when necessary, and then with cold professionalism. A few of the other SEALs seemed curious about her, watching her work with a kind of cautious interest, but none of them went out of their way to be friendly. Sarah didn't let it bother her. She had been the outsider before. In the afternoon, while the other handlers were running training exercises, Sarah took a folding chair and set it up about 10 feet from Rex's kennel. Then she sat down, pulled out a book, and started reading. Rex watched her with deep suspicion at first, packing back and forth in his kennel, occasionally growling. But Sarah didn't react. She just sat and read, turning pages slowly, completely calm. After 30 minutes, Rex stopped packing. After an hour, he lay down, though his eyes remained fixed on her. Sarah smiled to herself. Progress. She stayed there for 2 hours that first afternoon, just sitting and reading, letting Rex see that she was not a threat, that she didn't want anything from him, that she was simply there. When she finally stood to leave, Rex's ears perked up, but the growl that had become so familiar was quieter, more questioning than threatening. See you tomorrow, Rex, Sarah said softly. Over the next 3 days, Sarah maintained the same routine. She would arrive early before most of the base was awake and sit outside Rex's kennel. She didn't try to interact with him, didn't talk much, didn't make demands. She just existed in his space, calm and non-threatening. Slowly, gradually, Rex began to relax around her. The growling stopped. His body language became less defensive. On the 4th day, he even moved closer to the front of the kennel while she was there, lying down just a few feet from where she sat. It was progress, but Sarah knew it wasn't enough. She had less than 10 days left, and Chief Dawson had made it clear that if Rex wasn't showing significant improvement, the decision would be made to put him down. The thought made Sarah's chest tight with anger and sadness. This dog had served his country, had lost everything, and now he might be killed because he was too traumatized to immediately return to work. It wasn't right, it wasn't fair. But fairness, Sarah had learned, was not something the military always provided. On the 5th day, Morrison approached her while she was sitting outside Rex's kennel. Still wasting your time with that animal? He asked. Sarah looked up from her book. I don't consider it a waste of time. You've got 9 days left, Lieutenant. That dog still won't let anyone touch him. You really think you can fix him? I think he deserves the chance to heal, Sarah replied evenly. Morrison snorted. You know what your problem is? You think these dogs are people. You think they have feelings and emotions and all that touchy-feely stuff. But they're tools, weapons. And when a weapon stops working, you replace it. Sarah closed her book and stood, facing Morrison directly. Is that how you think of your team, too? As weapons to be replaced when they break? Morrison's eyes narrowed. That's different. Is it? Sarah challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're perfectly willing to discard a living being who's given everything for this country just because he needs help. And I have to wonder, if that's how you treat the dogs, how do you treat the men under your command when they come back with PTSD? Do Do you tell them they're broken weapons, too? You don't know anything about how I treat my men, Morrison said, his voice low and dangerous. You're right, I don't, Sarah agreed. But I know how you treat animals, and I know that says a lot about a person's character. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Morrison shook his head. You've got 9 days, Lieutenant. After that, this conversation is over, and so is that dog. He walked away, leaving Sarah standing there with her hands clenched into fists. She turned back to Rex's kennel. The dog was watching her intently, and Sarah could have sworn there was something like understanding in his dark eyes. He's wrong about you, she said softly. You're not a weapon, you're a soldier just like the rest of us, and soldiers take care of each other. That night, Sarah lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling and thinking. 9 days wasn't much time. She needed to accelerate Rex's progress somehow, but she couldn't rush him. Trauma didn't heal on a schedule. Then an idea occurred to her. It was risky, possibly foolish, but it might also be exactly what Rex needed. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the K-9 facility before dawn. The base was quiet, most personnel still asleep. Even the guard at the gate had looked surprised to see her at such an early hour. She let herself into the building and made her way to Rex's kennel. The dog was already awake, watching her approach with those familiar wary eyes. But there was no growling this morning, Sarah noticed. That was something. Morning, Rex, she said softly. I've got something different planned for us today. She had brought with her a sleeping bag, a thermos of coffee, and a small battery-powered camping lantern. Setting the lantern on the floor where it cast a gentle glow, she unrolled the sleeping bag directly in front of Rex's kennel, close enough that he could reach through the bars if he wanted to. Then she lay down on the sleeping bag, wrapped herself in a blanket, and simply rested there. Rex watched this unusual behavior with clear confusion. In all his time in this kennel, no human had ever voluntarily made themselves so vulnerable in his presence. Handlers walked past, threw food in, occasionally shouted commands. But they never stayed, never slept, never showed weakness. Sarah closed her eyes, though she remained alert to every sound, every movement. She could hear Rex shifting in his kennel, could sense his uncertainty. This was the gamble. By making herself completely vulnerable, she was either going to trigger his protective instincts or confirm his worst fears about humans being threats. An hour passed, 2. Sarah dozed lightly, genuinely tired from the long week. The concrete floor was uncomfortable, but she had slept in worse places during her deployments. When she woke more fully, the sun was beginning to rise, casting pale light through the high windows of the facility. And Rex had moved. The dog was now lying at the very front of his kennel, as close to Sarah as he could get without actually leaving the enclosed space. His head was resting on his paws, and his eyes were closed. Not fully asleep, Sarah could tell, but resting, trusting enough to rest. Sarah's heart swelled. This was breakthrough. This was the moment when Rex had decided, on some level, that maybe she was safe. Maybe she was Pack. She didn't move, didn't want to startle him. Instead, she just lay there, breathing slowly, letting the dog's own instincts guide him. The door to the facility opened, and Sarah heard footsteps. She turned her head slightly and saw Chief Dawson standing there, his eyes wide with surprise. "Lieutenant," he said quietly. "Morning, Chief," Sarah whispered back. Dawson approached slowly, taking in the scene. Rex's eyes opened, and a low rumble of warning started in his chest, but it died quickly. The dog seemed to understand that Dawson wasn't a threat to this person who had slept beside his kennel. "How long have you been here?" Dawson asked. "Since 0400, Sarah replied. Dawson shook his head in what might have been admiration or disbelief. "You slept on the floor next to him." "I wanted him to see that I trust him," Sarah explained. "That I'm not afraid. And more importantly, I wanted to show him that I'm willing to be part of his pack on his terms." Dawson crouched down, studying Rex carefully. "I'll be damned. He looks calmer than I've seen him in weeks." "He's starting to trust me," Sarah said, "but we still have a long way to go." Over the next few days, Sarah continued her new routine. She would arrive early, sleep or rest near Rex's kennel, and gradually the dog began to accept her presence as normal. By the 8th day, Rex was eating while Sarah was nearby, a huge sign of trust from an animal who had been so defensive about his food. But time was running out. Sarah had only 4 days left to show significant progress, and while Rex was more comfortable around her, he still wouldn't allow physical contact, still wouldn't follow commands reliably. Dawson had been supportive, even protective of Sarah's methods, but he was also a military man with regulations to follow. On the 9th day, Morrison and 2 of his teammates showed up during Sarah's morning session with Rex. "Time's running out, Lieutenant," Morrison said, his arms crossed. "What have you got to show for all this patience and trust building?" Sarah stood, brushing off her uniform. "Rex has shown significant behavioral improvement. He's eating normally, he's not aggressive toward me, and he's beginning to engage in non-threatening social behaviors." "Can you give him commands?" Morrison asked. "I can, but..." "Can you put a leash on him?" "Not yet, but..." "Can you deploy him in a working capacity?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "You know the answer to that." Morrison nodded. "Then you haven't done what you said you'd do. You haven't rehabilitated him. You've just made him slightly less aggressive. That's not enough, Lieutenant. Chief Dawson has protocols to follow, and tomorrow is your deadline." "One more day won't make a difference," Kowalski added. "That dog is still damaged goods." Sarah felt rage building in her chest, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Rex barked. It was a sharp, commanding sound, and it made all 3 seals turn to look at the kennel. Rex was standing at the front of his enclosure, his ears forward, his tail slightly raised, and he was staring directly at Morrison with an intensity that made the big seal take an involuntary step backward. "Easy," Morrison said, though whether he was talking to the dog or trying to reassure himself was unclear. Sarah watched this interaction with growing understanding. Rex wasn't being aggressive. He was being protective. He had bonded with her enough that he now saw these men, with their hostile body language and raised voices, as potential threats to his new pack member. "He's defending me," Sarah said softly. "What?" Dawson asked. He had been standing to the side observing. "Look at his posture," Sarah explained. "He's not preparing to attack. He's positioning himself between me and them. He sees them as a threat to me, and he's trying to warn them off." Morrison scoffed. "That's ridiculous. The dog is just being aggressive, same as always." But Dawson was nodding slowly. "No, Lieutenant Chen is right. I've seen this behavior before. Rex is showing protective instincts. That's significant." "It's a trick," Kowalski said. "She's probably been feeding him treats behind our backs, conditioning him." "I haven't given him a single treat," Sarah said flatly. "Everything he's done has been based on trust and social bonding, nothing more." Morrison looked skeptical, but there was something else in his expression, too. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint of doubt about his assumptions. "We'll see tomorrow," he said finally. "When the deadline hits, and you've got nothing to show but a dog that's still kennel-bound and unstable." After they left, Sarah approached Rex's kennel. The dog was still alert, still watching the door where the men had exited. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing up for me. I know you don't understand why they don't like me, but it means something that you tried to protect me." Rex turned to look at her, and for the first time since she had arrived on base, his tail wagged. Just once, a small movement, but unmistakable. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. This dog, this brave, traumatized soldier, was choosing to trust her, choosing to let her into his broken world. And tomorrow, if she couldn't prove his value to the command, he would be put down for having the audacity to be wounded by war. It was unacceptable, it was unjust, and Sarah was not going to let it happen. That afternoon, she requested a meeting with Dawson in his office. "Chief, I need to talk to you about tomorrow," she said. Dawson leaned back in his chair. "I know what you're going to say, Lieutenant. You need more time." "I need a fair evaluation," Sarah corrected. "Rex has made incredible progress in just 9 days. He's eating, he's sleeping, he's showing social bonding and protective behaviors. But he's not ready for standard handling yet, and I don't think he should be judged by those standards. The regulations are clear, Dawson said, though his tone was sympathetic. A military working dog must be able to perform basic functions. If Rex can't be leashed, can't follow commands, can't be safely handled, then he's a liability. He's a veteran, Sarah said, her voice passionate. He served this country with distinction. He lost his handler in combat, and now we're going to kill him because he has PTSD? How is that different from abandoning our human soldiers when they come home traumatized? Dawson was quiet for a long moment. You're right, he said finally. It's not different, but I don't make the rules, Lieutenant, I just enforce them. Then help me change them, Sarah pleaded. Give me 2 more weeks. Let me show you what Rex can become with proper treatment. I can't authorize that without approval from command, Dawson said. And I can tell you right now, they won't approve it. There's too much pressure to maintain efficiency, too many other dogs waiting for slots in this program. Sarah felt desperation clawing at her. Then let me try something else. Let me prove Rex's value in a different way. What do you mean? Morrison and his team don't believe Rex has made progress because they haven't seen him work, Sarah said. They've only seen him in his kennel. What if I can demonstrate his capabilities in a real-world scenario? Dawson frowned. You can't even get a leash on him yet, Lieutenant. How are you going to run a real-world scenario? Not a standard scenario, Sarah admitted, but something that shows his instincts are still sharp, that he's still a valuable asset. Chief, you were a handler before you became kennel master. You know that these dogs are more than just their training. They have intuition, intelligence, loyalty. Rex has all of those things. He just needs the chance to show it. Dawson studied her carefully. What exactly are you proposing? Tomorrow morning, before the evaluation, let me try one test with Rex, Sarah said. Not a standard obedience trial, but something that taps into his natural abilities. If he fails, I'll accept the decision to retire him. But if he succeeds, I want you to advocate for an extension. 2 more weeks, that's all I'm asking. Dawson was silent for a long time. Then he sighed. You're putting me in a difficult position, Lieutenant. I know, Chief, but someone has to stand up for these dogs. Someone has to say that their service and sacrifice mean something, even when they're wounded. All right, Dawson said finally. One test tomorrow morning at 0600. Morrison and his evaluation team will be present. If Rex shows significant capability, I'll push for an extension. But Lieutenant, I'm warning you now, Command doesn't like exceptions to protocol. Even if I advocate for it, there's no guarantee they'll approve. I understand, Sarah said. Thank you, Chief. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She spent hours planning her approach for the next morning, thinking through every possibility, every potential problem. She had one chance to save Rex's life, and she couldn't afford to fail. At midnight, she left her quarters and walked back to the K-9 facility. The base was quiet, just a few lights burning here and there, the distant sound of the ocean beyond the perimeter. She let herself into the building and approached Rex's kennel. The dog was awake, watching her with those dark, intelligent eyes. Hey, boy, Sarah said softly. Tomorrow's the big day. Tomorrow we show them what you're really made of. She pulled out the sleeping bag she had left in the facility and arranged it on the floor outside his kennel. Then she lay down, as had become her routine. I'm not going to let them give up on you, she whispered into the darkness. I promise. In his kennel, Rex moved closer to the bars. And for the first time since she had arrived, the dog made a sound that wasn't a growl or a bark. It was a soft whine, almost questioning. Sarah reached out slowly and extended her hand through the bars. For a long moment, Rex just stared at her hand. Then, carefully, tentatively, he stretched his neck forward and touched his nose to her fingers. It was the first physical contact they had shared, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Good boy, she whispered. Such a good boy, Rex. The dog didn't pull away. Instead, he pressed his nose more firmly against her hand, accepting her touch, accepting her. They stayed like that for several minutes, Sarah's hand extended through the bars, Rex's nose pressed against her palm. A bridge built between two wounded soldiers, both trying to find their way back from the darkness. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, Sarah withdrew her hand and settled into her sleeping bag. Within minutes, she was asleep. She didn't see Rex lie down as close to her as the kennel would allow, his body mirroring hers, standing guard over the person who had refused to give up on him. The sun was just breaking over the horizon when Sarah woke to the sound of boots on concrete. She sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. Morrison stood in the doorway of the facility, flanked by Kowalski and 3 other SEALs. Chief Dawson was behind them, his expression carefully neutral. "Well, well," Morrison said. "Sleeping on the job, Lieutenant." Sarah stood, rolling up her sleeping bag with quick, efficient movements. "I was observing Rex's nighttime behavior patterns." "Sure you were," Kowalski muttered. Dawson stepped forward. "Gentlemen, Lieutenant Chen has requested the opportunity to demonstrate Rex's capabilities before we make our final evaluation. I've agreed to allow this." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "What kind of demonstration?" "A detection scenario," Sarah said. She had spent half the night thinking this through, and she was confident it was Rex's best chance. Before his last deployment, Rex was one of the top explosive detection dogs in the program. I want to see if those instincts are still intact. "You can't even get a leash on him," one of the other SEALs pointed out. "How are you going to run a detection scenario?" "I'm going to trust him," Sarah said simply, "and I'm going to ask you to trust me." Morrison crossed his arms. "This should be good. All right, Lieutenant, show us what you've got." They moved to one of the outdoor training areas, a large space set up with various obstacles and hiding spots used for training exercises. Dawson had arranged for training aids, inert explosive materials that carried the scent signature dogs were trained to detect. "I've hidden 5 training aids throughout this course," Dawson explained. "Standard detection drill. A working dog should be able to find at least 3 of them in 10 minutes. "And you think Rex can do this without even being on a leash?" Morrison asked skeptically. "I think Rex can do this because he's a professional," Sarah replied. "His handler might be gone, but his training isn't." She walked back to where Rex waited in a temporary kennel that had been set up at the edge of the training area. The dog was agitated, clearly stressed by the change in routine and the presence of so many people. Sarah knelt down in front of the kennel, making herself small and non-threatening. "Rex," she said softly, "I know you're scared, I know this is all unfamiliar, but I need you to trust me, okay? I need you to remember who you are, not just a dog, not just a pet. You're a soldier, you're a warrior, and right now I need the warrior." She reached for the kennel latch. Behind her, she heard one of the SEALs say, "This is crazy. That dog is going to bolt the second that door opens." Sarah ignored him. She opened the latch, then stepped back, giving Rex space. For a moment, the dog didn't move. He stared at the open door, then at Sarah, then back at the door. Freedom was right there. He could run. He could escape all these people, all this noise, all this stress. But Sarah was standing there, calm and steady, her eyes on his. "Come on, Rex," she said quietly. "Come on, boy." Rex stepped out of the kennel. Morrison let out a low whistle. "I'll be damned." Rex immediately moved to Sarah's side, pressing close to her leg. She could feel him trembling, could sense his fear and uncertainty. But he had chosen to stay with her rather than run. That meant everything. "Good boy," Sarah murmured. "Such a good boy." She began walking toward the training course, and Rex moved with her, maintaining that close contact. They must have looked strange, Sarah thought, a small woman and a traumatized dog moving as one unit across the base. But she didn't care what they looked like. All that mattered was that Rex was with her, trusting her. They reached the edge of the course. Sarah stopped and crouched down, bringing herself to Rex's level. "Okay, boy," she said. "This is what you were born to do. This is your purpose. Find them. Show them what you can do." She made the hand signal for search. A command Rex would have seen thousands of times with his previous handler. Rex's ears perked up. For a moment, Sarah saw the fog of trauma lift from his eyes, replaced by focus and purpose. This was familiar. This was something he understood. The dog moved away from her side, nose to the ground, beginning to quarter the area in a methodical search pattern. It was like watching a switch flip. The scared, defensive animal from the kennel was gone, replaced by a trained professional doing the work he had been born to do. 2 minutes in, Rex sat down abruptly next to a pile of debris. The alert signal. "Mark," Dawson called out. "That's one." Sarah felt her heart soar. She called Rex back to her with a click of her tongue, and the dog returned immediately, looking up at her as if to say, "Did I do good?" "Yes," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, you did so good." She sent him out again. Within 8 minutes, Rex had located all 5 training aids, performing flawlessly, his old training and instincts overriding his fear and trauma. When he found the last one, Sarah didn't call him back immediately. Instead, she walked over to where he sat, proud and alert, and for the first time, she reached out and placed her hand on his head. Rex didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He leaned into her touch, and Sarah felt something break open in her chest. "That's my boy," she whispered. "That's my good, brave boy." She looked up to find the group of SEALs staring at them in silence. Even Morrison looked stunned. Dawson was smiling. 5 for 5 in under 10 minutes completely off-leash. That's exceptional work, Lieutenant, and Rex. "It proves nothing," Kowalski said, though his voice lacked conviction. "So he can still detect. That doesn't mean he's safe to deploy. He's still aggressive toward handlers." "He's not aggressive toward Lieutenant Chen," Dawson pointed out. "Because she's been babying him for over a week," Morrison argued. "What happens when she's not around? What happens when someone else needs to work with him?" Sarah stood, her hand still on Rex's head. "Then we train for that. We slowly introduce him to other handlers, building up his tolerance and trust. It's not complicated. It just takes time and patience." "Time we don't have," Morrison said. "Lieutenant, you've done impressive work here, I'll grant you that. But one successful drill doesn't change the fundamental problem. This dog is a one-person animal now. That makes him unreliable in a military setting." "Actually," said a new voice, "it makes him perfect for certain applications." Everyone turned. A man in an officer's uniform was approaching from the main building. He was older, maybe 50, with the bearing of someone used to command. His name tape identified him as Captain Reeves, and the insignia on his collar indicated he was from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Dawson straightened. "Captain Reeves, we weren't expecting you." "I was on base for other business when Chief Dawson informed me about this evaluation," Reeves said. "I wanted to see for myself." He looked at Sarah. "You must be Lieutenant Chen." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. Reeves walked over to where she stood with Rex. The dog tensed but didn't growl, perhaps sensing the authority in the captain's demeanor. "I've been reading your file, Lieutenant," Reeves said. "Impressive credentials. 3 deployments, multiple commendations. Specialist training in animal behavior and trauma response." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said, uncertain where this was going. Reeves turned to Dawson. "Chief, I've been looking for a K-9 team for a special project. Something that requires a dog with exceptional detection skills and a handler who can work independently in high-stress environments. Based on what I just saw, Lieutenant Chen and Rex might be exactly what I need." Morrison stepped forward. "With respect, Captain, that dog is still classified as unstable." "He was unstable," Reeves corrected. "What I just watched was a highly trained animal performing complex tasks flawlessly under the guidance of a skilled handler. The bond between Lieutenant Chen and Rex is exactly the kind of partnership we need for this assignment." "What kind of assignment?" Sarah asked. Reeves smiled. "That's classified, Lieutenant. But if you're interested, and if you're willing to take Rex on as your permanent partner, I can make sure both of you have the time and resources you need to continue his rehabilitation while also serving in an active capacity." Sarah's mind was racing. This was more than she had hoped for. Not just a reprieve for Rex, but an actual assignment, a purpose. "I'm very interested, sir," she said. "Good," Reeves said. He turned to Dawson. "Chief, I'm pulling Rex from the standard rotation and assigning him to Lieutenant Chen's permanent care. They'll be attached to my unit effective immediately." Dawson looked relieved. "Understood, Captain." Morrison's jaw was tight, but he couldn't argue with a superior officer's direct orders. "Sir, if I may ask, what made you decide to take this approach?" Reeves looked at him steadily. "Because, Lieutenant Morrison, I learned a long time ago that the military's greatest asset isn't our weapons or our technology. It's our people, and that includes the dogs who serve alongside us. Rex has given everything for this country. The least we can do is give him the chance to heal and continue serving, rather than discarding him the moment he becomes inconvenient." The rebuke was subtle but clear. Morrison's face flushed, but he said nothing. "Lieutenant Chen," Reeves continued, "report to my office at 1300 hours. We'll discuss the details of your new assignment. In the meantime, get Rex settled and fed. He's earned it." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "Thank you, sir." As Reeves walked away, Dawson approached Sarah with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Lieutenant, you did it. You saved him." Sarah looked down at Rex, who was sitting calmly at her side, his eyes bright and alert. "We saved each other," she said softly. The crowd began to disperse, the SEALs heading back to their duties. But Morrison lingered for a moment, staring at Sarah with an unreadable expression. "You got lucky," he said finally. "No," Sarah replied. "I trusted my training and I trusted Rex. That's not luck, that's competence." Morrison shook his head and walked away. Kowalski paused as he passed. "That was impressive," he admitted grudgingly. "What you did with that dog, I didn't think it was possible." "Most people don't," Sarah said. "That's the problem." After everyone had left, Sarah sat down on the ground, and Rex immediately came to lie beside her, his head resting on her leg. She stroked his fur gently, marveling at how far they had come in just 10 days. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We really did it." But even as she celebrated this victory, Sarah knew that the real work was just beginning. Rex was improving, but he was far from fully healed. And whatever assignment Captain Reeves had in mind, it would likely push both of them to their limits. Still, as she sat there in the morning sun with Rex's warm weight against her, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and Rex settled into their new routine. Captain Reeves had been true to his word, providing them with a private training area and resources to continue Rex's rehabilitation. The assignment he had mentioned turned out to be a long-term project developing new K9 protocols for special operations, which meant Sarah and Rex would be working together extensively, refining their partnership and demonstrating techniques for other handlers. It was perfect. It gave Rex the structure and purpose he needed while allowing Sarah to work at a pace that didn't compromise his recovery. Rex's progress was remarkable. With consistent training and the security of knowing Sarah wasn't going to abandon him, the dog began to open up in ways no one had thought possible. He started accepting treats from Sarah's hand. He allowed her to groom him, to check him for injuries, to put a leash on him when necessary. More importantly, he started to show personality again. Sarah discovered that Rex had a playful side, that he enjoyed puzzle toys and swimming in the ocean. She learned that he was gentle with smaller animals, protective of those he considered part of his pack, and incredibly intelligent. Other handlers began to take notice. Dawson would bring them by to observe Sarah's training methods, and gradually, the culture at the K9 facility began to shift. More emphasis was placed on the individual needs of each dog, on building trust rather than demanding obedience, on understanding that these animals were partners, not tools. Even Morrison came around, though he would never admit it outright. Sarah caught him watching her work with Rex one afternoon, and when she asked if he needed something, he had just shrugged and said, "Just seeing what all the fuss is about." But the biggest change came 3 weeks after the evaluation, when Sarah received an unexpected visitor. She was in the training yard with Rex, working on distance commands, when Dawson approached with a young man in uniform. The man looked to be in his mid-20s, with red-rimmed eyes and a haunted expression that Sarah recognized immediately. "Lieutenant Chen," Dawson said, "this is Corporal Hayes. He's a handler whose dog was killed in action 2 months ago. He's been struggling since then." Sarah looked at the young man and saw herself reflected in his eyes. The guilt, the grief, the sense of having failed someone who depended on you. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Corporal," she said sincerely. Hayes nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "The corporal has been considering leaving the K-9 program," Dawson continued. "He doesn't feel like he can bond with another dog, but I thought maybe, after seeing what you've accomplished with Rex, he might be willing to reconsider." Sarah understood what Dawson was really asking. He wanted her to share her story, to show Hayes that it was possible to move forward after loss. "Corporal, would you like to meet Rex?" Sarah asked. Hayes looked uncertain, but nodded. Sarah called Rex over. The dog came immediately, but she noticed how he slowed as he approached Hayes, his ears forward, his nose working. Then, without any command from Sarah, Rex sat down in front of the young corporal and offered his paw. Hayes stared at the outstretched paw, and Sarah saw tears begin to stream down his face. "He knows," Hayes whispered. "He knows I lost my partner." "Animals are incredibly intuitive," Sarah said softly. "Especially dogs who have experienced trauma themselves. Rex understands grief better than most people ever will." Hayes knelt down and took Rex's paw, shaking it gently. The dog moved closer, pressing his head against the corporal's chest in a gesture of comfort that made Sarah's throat tight. For several minutes, Hayes just held Rex, crying into the dog's fur while Rex stood still and steady, offering the only comfort he could. When Hayes finally pulled back, wiping his eyes, he looked at Sarah with something like hope in his expression. "Do you think," he asked hesitantly, "do you think I could learn your methods for working with traumatized dogs?" Sarah smiled. "Corporal, I think you'd be excellent at it. In fact, I've been working on a training program for exactly that. Chief Dawson and I were planning to pilot it next month. We could use someone with your experience." "Really?" Hayes asked. "Really," Sarah confirmed. "These dogs give everything for us. The least we can do is learn how to help them when they're hurting, and sometimes helping them helps us heal, too." Dawson was smiling. "I'll get the paperwork started. Lieutenant Chen, it looks like you're about to become not just a handler, but an instructor."